So let me go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Cinnamon Porter, and my pronouns are they and she. I am the mission educator for YWCA McLean County. And today I'm going to be talking with you all about microaggressions. So before we get started, has anyone heard that term before, microaggressions? Yeah, some folks. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to define microaggressions, provide some examples, and I'll also need your feedback or input because many of us who are in marginalized communities have experienced microaggressions. So if you feel comfortable, there'll be a time for folks to share some personal examples. We're going to talk about the toll that microaggressions take on people, and then what we can do when we experience microaggressions, and then also talking about how we can check ourselves and other folks when we hear those microaggressions. So before I begin on the microaggressions, I wanted to start with some community agreements. And the first one is to be present. So y'all showed up, so you're most of the way there, but there's gonna be time for discussion. And then if you all have any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask those questions or make any comments. Participate. Active listening, so making sure that we're listening to understand, and then open and honest communication. So if you do share in the portion where we talk about experiences with microaggressions, that takes vulnerability, right? So be open, be honest, and folks who are listening, again, active listening. And then embracing discomfort. So we're gonna talk about how we might be perpetuating microaggressions. So might make us feel a little uncomfortable, but that's okay, right? That means that we're learning and that we're growing. So before I move on to the next slide, are there any other agreements that you all would like to have in this space? Everyone's good? All right. Well, then let's go ahead and move to our next slide. All right, so defining microaggressions. This is a quote from Daryl W. Sue, who has written a couple of books and has done a lot of talks on microaggressions. And so here's how he defines it. Microaggressions are the everyday slights, indignities, put downs, and assaults that people of color, women, the LGBTQ population, or those who are marginalized in their experiences and their day-to-day interactions with people. So I know microaggressions has kind of come to the forefront relatively recently, but the term was actually coined in 1970 by Harvard University professor Chester Pierce. And he used it to describe the insults and the slights that he had witnessed as a Black man from white people. And so I'm gonna quote just a little bit of what he wrote, which is, so he's talking about microaggressions, and he says, these racial assaults to Black dignity and Black hope are incessant and cumulative. And I think that word cumulative is a good word, because when I think about microaggressions, it's like one microaggression is a tiny, paper cut. But imagine experiencing 1,000 paper cuts in one day. So the one, okay, that hurts a little, but it's not too bad. But then if it keeps building and building and building and building, that's gonna take a toll on you by the end of the day, right? So cumulative is a good word. Any single one, so any single microaggression may be gross. In fact, the major vehicle for racism in this country is offenses done by Black people, or to Black people by white people, in this sort of gratuitous, never-ending way. These mini disasters accumulate, and it is the sum total of multiple microaggressions by whites to Blacks that has pervasive effects to the stability and peace of this world. So when we think about microaggressions, it is these daily, small put downs, but that build over time. And so in a future slide, we'll talk about how that affects marginalized communities. What we see with microaggressions is that it is very closely tied into implicit bias. And so when I talk about implicit bias, we're talking about an action or a feeling without, like a stereotype and attitude that we're not even aware of. So it's in our pre-conscious, right? It's not something that we have to think about. So if I were to make a microaggression, so a comment or a behavior, I'm not consciously doing it. It is just ingrained in me to act or react in a certain type of way. And so that's what is interesting about microaggressions, is that it's not a conscious thing that someone is saying or doing, but then that's the hard part to address it. If you don't know that it's a microaggression, then you can't really address it. Questions about this definition right here, and I'll give some examples as well of microaggressions. All right. So up on the screen, we have some folks holding up signs with microaggressions that they've experienced. Microaggressions, like I mentioned before, can be comments, words, it can be behaviors, it can be thoughts. So starting on the top left, it says, "I don't see you as really Black." The next one says, "You're good with numbers, right?" And so that's an Asian man holding that sign, right? So the stereotype that Asians are good at math, and someone might say, well, why would that hurt your feelings, right? That sounds like a compliment. You're good with numbers, right? And for the people who are not experiencing that microaggression, they are often well-intentioned people, right? They're trying to give a compliment. Oh, well, I don't really see you as Black, right? That should be a good thing. Or I'm assuming that you're good with numbers, right? Wouldn't that be a good thing? But actually, that is really harmful. And those stereotypes perpetuate racism. The next one says, "You don't talk like you're Black." So again, someone making this comment is thinking that they're, making this comment as a positive, when really, well, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. What do you mean I don't talk like I'm Black? Is there only one way that Black people speak? Is there only one way that white people speak? No, right? Everybody talks in all different sorts of ways. But when we dig deeper, what they're saying is Black people are uneducated, right? I've had this comment said to me. The way that it's been said to me was, oh, you're so well-spoken. Why would you assume otherwise? Right? So your assumption is you see my skin color, and you assume that because of my skin color that I'm going to be uneducated. And then you hear me speak and you say, oh, wow, you're so well-spoken, right? You don't talk like you're Black. Well, what does that mean? Going to the second row, It says, are you the new diversity hire? So a person of color and a woman of color in a higher up position, you know, are you the new diversity hire? Or, yeah. The next one says, you are so beautiful for a trans girl. So as a trans person, I'm not supposed to be beautiful, right? And the last one, can I pet your hair? You're treating that person as an object, right? Something at a museum or the petting zoo, right? Can I pet your hair? Or something similar, which I've also experienced, is someone just going in. They just go to touch my hair. And it's like, I do not know you. Please don't do that, right? But for some reason, there's this assumption that basically an assumption of power and control, you know, over my body as a marginalized person, that they just feel comfortable to put their hand in my hair. A very weird experience, I'll tell you that. So these are just a few of many, many, many examples of microaggressions that exist. So what I want you all to do is reflect for a second on the definition of microaggression, and if you feel comfortable, to share any experiences you've had with microaggressions, either personally or either that you've seen or heard. So if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself and share those experiences.
Hello, I'm Janice Cooper, and as a younger person, when afros were the thing, it was, you know, not only can I touch your hair, but oh, it's so soft, like it was supposed to be brittle and hard and, you know, coarse or whatever. But yeah, that's my share.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, and thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Are there any other folks who would like to chime in? Some other ones, excuse me, that we might have seen even in, and we see these microaggressions play out in movies, and something that you all, like once we get done with this presentation and while we're talking about it, and once it's, you know, after COVID and we could all be back together, something that you might notice on the streets while you're walking around, but one that is been persistent for a long time would be a Black man entering either an elevator or like walking on the same, like, you know, passing a white woman. And what she does is, you know, grab her necklace or grab her bag, or basically making the assumption that, okay, this Black man is walking past me and they're going to steal my things, right? So making an assumption, a stereotype about Black people, about Black men, and they might not even realize that they're doing it, right? So they just walk past them and kind of take a step to the side and keep on walking. And so what's going to be hard for us, you know, as we work on this to break down, is realizing and just being very observant of all the behaviors that we do every single day to figure out, ooh, is that a microaggression and I didn't even know it? Another one that I've heard is something that my sister experienced, was, oh, you're so pretty for a Black girl. Again, is that, they're saying it as a compliment, but is that really a compliment? Are Black women not supposed to be beautiful? So it's again this, it's cringy, right? These just little slights, but they accumulate over and over and over and over and over again. Oh, another big one is if you introduce yourself to someone, hey, I'm Cinnamon, nice to meet you. Oh, nice to meet you. And then they go, so where are you from? Illinois. But like, what are you? Cinnamon. I don't know. American, a U.S. citizen. No, but like, what are you really? And it's like, that comment is made oftentimes to people of color who live in the United States, because it's like, for some reason, white folks think, well, only white people live in the United States. No, people of color been here. So asking, well, what are you really? Where are you really from? It's just, well, why are you even asking me this question, right? It's intrusive. It's an absurd question. I just met you, so I'm not really sure why you're asking me that. But I hope you all are kind of getting a frame of what microaggressions can look like. Before I go on to the next slide, is there anybody else who wants to share or has any questions or comments that they want to add to these examples of microaggressions? All right, then we'll go on to this next slide. So looking at some long-term effects, there is a little bit of data out, but like some research in the process about how microaggressions affect marginalized people and communities. But one thing that was prevalent is how harmful microaggressions can be on someone's mental well-being and then also their physical well-being. So what we see when it comes to someone's mental health is that it would affect, after experiencing microaggressions, it could cause depression, anxiety, imposter syndrome, creates anger. And then looking at physical health, what we see is it causes stress, as you could imagine. It can, and then with stress comes, hypertension and all those things that are related to stress. So I would be interested to do this presentation again in, 5 years after some of this research gets worked out to really take a look at the numbers. But even without the specific numbers, I mean, all you have to do is talk to somebody who is a part of a marginalized community and say, hey, when someone makes this comment, right, or this behavior, how does that make you feel? And I mean, that's all you need, right? I don't need specific numbers, but people will tell you how it makes them feel. And, some of the microaggressions that I've experienced have made me feel isolated, right? To not feel included in a community. It has made me feel angry. It has made me feel sad. It can build up to stress. Some other harmful effects of microaggressions would be, so if these microaggressions are happening in a work setting, what we see is a lower work productivity. So that person starts to become withdrawn. And to the next point, it can create a hostile work environment or just wherever that environment is. And when it comes to work, then you become isolated. So then now you're not working as hard. You don't care to be there. Again, that increase of stress. And the other hard part is, so that's like coming from a work perspective, but imagine if, let's say, I'm a patient, I go to the doctor's office, and it is the doctor who is creating that microaggression, right? So now I may not feel comfortable going back to that specific doctor or just doctors in general, right? Because if I've gone to one, and they've all made different kinds of microaggressions, well then, you know, I might stop going to see a physician, and then going back to it taking a toll on someone's physical health. I mean, obviously that adds up. If I'm not going to the physician, if I don't get things checked out, if something's wrong, then that's going to take a toll on my physical health. I see in the chat, someone says that they can happen in relationships as well. Absolutely. So I've experienced microaggressions, you know, from coworkers to random strangers to family members, and also, you know, from physicians, things like that. And so one example would be within my own family. You know, I have a mixed family when it comes to race. And so some of my white family members have made comments that were microaggressions. And it just, you know, it strains the relationship because they think they're doing something that isn't hurtful, or they think they're making a positive comment, but when in reality, that comment was harmful and hurtful. So we'll talk about this in a second, but the next question is, well, what do you do then, right? But yeah, thank you for adding that. Questions, comments before I move on to the next slide. Someone said in the chat, an interesting take with the doctors. I can certainly see that happen as people advocate for their health needs. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that I want to mention about microaggressions is, and well, I guess let's do it in reverse order. I had it in a different order. That's okay. So what can we do? So if we are the one who is, you know, creating or producing a microaggression, or if we are the bystander to that situation, what can we do? But one thing is, it's not about our intent. So, you know, if I said to someone, oh, well, where are you really from, right? Or you're good with numbers, right? It doesn't matter what my intent was. So my intent might have been, oh, I'm trying to give you a compliment. What matters is how it affected the person that you made that comment to, or the behavior that you presented and how it affected them. Because yes, you might have intended on it being a compliment, but when it was received, it wasn't. And so that is an important, I think, step to acknowledge when we think about microaggressions, is it's not about our intent, but how it has affected somebody else. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, that comment wasn't cool, or that behavior wasn't cool, and this is how this is how it made me feel, our response shouldn't be, but I mean, I just meant it as a compliment, or I just meant it this way. We need to just take a deep breath, take a step back and say, I apologize, right? I'm sorry for what I said and, you know, how it made you feel. And then we need to self-reflect on that. So again, thinking about, okay, if we're the bystanders to a microaggression or we're the ones who are committing that microaggression, what else can we do? So we can seek out interactions with people who are different than you. And that's an important step also because when we think about microaggressions, as I mentioned earlier, they're closely related to implicit bias. So if you are just in this tight circle with everyone who looks like you, talks like you, has the same values, beliefs, right? Same social status, gender, all those sorts of things. If they are all the same, right? Take a step out from that. Because what happens when we move from out of our circle? We get to experience the world for what it is, and that it is diverse, and that there are many different types of people with many different lived experiences. And so when we start to experience those people and things, that breaks down those stereotypes that we might have about people. And so that can help us when it comes to microaggressions. The second point, don't be defensive. So again, if someone calls you out and says, hey, what you said wasn't cool, it hurt my feelings, don't get defensive about it. Again, just take a step back and apologize and do some self-reflection there. Be open to discussing your biases and how they might hurt others. So whether we like it or not, we all have biases. That's just, you know, we're people, we make biases, but it is what we do and what we say and how we act on those biases that makes the difference. And so, you know, I challenge you all to reflect, you know, take a couple of days, and when you go to the grocery store or you're watching a movie, when you see a certain person show up, what thought comes to your mind? And then how do you behave based on that thought? And, you know, I do this all the time, but I remember doing it a lot a couple of years ago, thinking about my behavior. That's kind of where my language. That's kind of where I started. So instead of saying like, you guys, or hey, boys and girls, or things like that, as an educator, I stopped to take a second and think like, okay, I can be way more inclusive than this. And like, how might it hurt somebody for them to not be included when I say something, right? So I started with my language and just actively thinking about every word that I was going to say. And that allowed me to be better about what I said. And then that just becomes routine, right? So now I don't think about it anymore. It just comes out as, hey, everyone, or what's up, folks, right? It's now just a part of what I say and what I do. So I think just taking a look at what we say and do is important. And then the last thing is fight back against biases when you encounter them. So maybe you are not the person who was hurt by the microaggression, but you were there when it happened, right? You overheard it or you saw it or what have you. If you don't say anything, that tells the person who said or did the microaggression, that tells them that that's an okay thing to do or to say. And then that's acceptable to do that. So what we have to do is to speak up and say, hey, that's not cool to say, or that's not cool to do. And what that does is the person who experienced that microaggression probably won't speak up for themselves. They may or they may not, but they probably won't, because as someone who experiences the microaggression, they have to make this choice. Am I going to make a big deal out of this, or am I just going to take this little thing and then just go about my day, right? But the thing is, it's one little thing over one little thing over one little thing all day long. So they might be feeling like it just is not even worth it. And so I'll go back to the other slide that I have of, you know, what we can do if we're experiencing that microaggression. But it's important that if we are the bystander in that situation, that we become the upstander, that we stand up to, that situation and just say, hey, this is not tolerated. Like, that wasn't all right to do or to say. Before I go to the other slide, are there any questions or comments? Matt, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of conversation about exactly what we're talking about here in the chat. And so I would offer just not a defensible perspective, certainly, but a perspective about how many people, much of this language that we talk about is generational. And so how we help people who have a different view of language, because that's how they grew up, how we get them to understand that language has power, and what they might consider to be an innocent comment or an innocent word, if it is making you as a human being feel uncomfortable, then that's really, again, all that matters. It's not about, again, as you said, the intent, it's about the effect. And so the question is, you know, as an upstander, how, or even someone who may be experiencing a microaggression, how do we begin that discussion? That the first, from my perspective, the first thing I say is going to make the biggest difference in the next thing I say. So I would just be interested about some perspective on that, just a comment or some perspectives on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that. So yeah, I was just looking at the chat here. And so absolutely. People like to make excuses about, well, this person is from a certain area or a certain generation, so they don't know any better. Okay, but that didn't just happen overnight, right? And so you've had time to change and to adapt, as we all do. Some of us sooner rather than later, but that doesn't, again, going to the intent point, that doesn't hurt someone less because, oh, you're just from a certain generation. No, it's still just as hurtful. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's about that intent point. So someone said, do you think being called a gal a microaggression? What I think is important to note about microaggressions is that it affects people in different ways. So like, one person might be okay being called gal, and that's fine with them. You might call someone else gal, and they might not be okay with it. So again, just being respectful, that if someone says, hey, please don't call me that we don't, right? Instead of saying, oh, well, so-and-so is cool with it, or I didn't mean it to be like that. And then, yeah, someone saying, is it the same as using the word or term, hey guys, in a large group? Absolutely. Because especially us in the Midwest, we say, hey guys, to everybody, and don't think twice about it. But isn't there a word choice that we could use that would be less harmful and more inclusive? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So why wouldn't I choose to choose to be less harmful and more inclusive? And so that's why I just say, hey, everyone, or hey, folks, or whatever it's going to be. Someone else said in the chat, they would want to address someone without being defensive. And so that's the tricky part about addressing microaggressions. So let me go to this previous slide. this is, if you are the person that experiences the microaggression, how do you address it? The answer is there is no one right way. On Monday, I might call you out on it, and on Tuesday, I might just let it slide and not say anything because that's how I'm feeling on Tuesday, right? So there's no one right way to address it. But if you choose to address it, you can't control how the other person is going to react and how the other person is going to respond. So that's the difficulty. And so something that might help you decide whether you address it or not is some of these points that I have here. So is this person worth talking to? So, you know, sometimes these microaggressions happen on the internet, social media. And it's like, all right, I knew this person back in high school. Is this person even worth talking to? I don't even know them anymore, right? Is it even worth it to get into this with them? You know, that could be one example. So yes or no. And then moving from there, does this person have the capacity to hear what you have to say? So, you know, even going back to the community agreements that we started with, is this person engaging in active listening? Are they here to listen to what you have to say, or are they just listening to respond, right? They're just listening to find one thing to respond off of. They're not listening to what you're saying in totality. Another thing that you can do is to take a break in conversation, right? So let's say, you know, someone harms me with a microaggression and I call them out and say, hey, that wasn't okay. Like, this is how it hurt me. And so, you know, I say, is this person we're talking to? Yes. I think they have the capacity to hear me. So we're going back and forth. But at a certain point, I get tired. It's okay to take a break in that conversation and just say to that person, you know what, like, we're both really engaged in this, but I need a timeout, and, you know, can we come back to this at a different time? That's also okay to do. And then this last point could have gone on either side, but encourage the other person to do their homework, meaning Google is free. Well, I mean, internet is expensive, but using Google is free. And I could try to explain it to you, but sometimes I don't have the time, the energy, or the capacity to try to explain to you on why what you said or did was long and tie it into how it, you know, is a stem from some sort of ism and oppression and etc. So just take the time out to do a little Google search before, you know, coming to me with that. So this one really could have been on either side. And really, I feel like it probably should have been on the other side, which is, and going back to that comment about, you know, this person is from this generation, reading up and staying current on what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, different things like that. You can read that all online or engaging in conversations or whatever. And if you're unsure, again, at least put in a little, you know, put in some work. Because I've had folks come to me and with a question that was like, you didn't just, you know, look this up first? Because then what I just do is send them some links and then, here, read this, because I'm not gonna, you know, break it down for you. I'm not gonna have to read all of this, break it down for you, and give it to you so that you understand it. Like, I need you to put in some work here too. Oh, there was another point I was gonna make, but now I forgot it. That's all right. Questions or comments about this slide, or just any of the any of the material so far?
I had a couple thoughts as you were talking. I think about that whole generational like microaggressions, and I think I've had that happen where like in my family, it's kind of like, well, it's the generation they came from. I was like, it still doesn't make it right, and it still doesn't make it okay. And I think that's something where, okay, yeah, it doesn't matter that if they come to it and they didn't realize that they do now. So what are they going to do in response to that?
Absolutely.
And then another thing I thought about too with myself is this idea of being confrontable and teachable. Kind of going back to the defensiveness that we talk about, you know, someone isn't going to feel comfortable telling me, you know, hey, that hurt me, or the comment you said was like a microaggression, if I am not able to take that and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, and then put action behind those words and say, okay, for next time, I want to make sure that I'm being more aware of that, or that my language is being more inclusive, because we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to say things that hurt other people, but it's not about, you know, whether or not we're going to do that. It's when, and it's, you know, are we people that are teachable and confrontable? And I think about, you know, is this person worth talking to? That's what I think about, is like, is this person able to be confronted? Is this person trying to learn? Or is this person just, I'm going to hold to what I'm going to hold to, and you're just going to have to take me as I am? And I think that in the idea of being more inclusive, you know, the greatest thing that we can do, I think, as people, is to learn to be teachable and learn to be confrontable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding that in. Because you're absolutely right when you said that we're all going to mess up at some point in time, and we're all going to mess up a lot, right? But it's how do you take that in stride, right? And try to, now you know better, you're going to do better. Or like you said, do you just stick, you know, what do they call it? You, I don't know, put your post in the mud or something along those lines. You just stay there, right? You're not trying to move forwards or backwards. But absolutely. And so when someone calls us out on that, they're not trying to say, you're a terrible person, right? They're trying to tell you, hey, you know, like they're saying that they want to have a relationship with you, and that here's how we can make this relationship better. Here's how I want to feel, or how you can make me feel respected. So it's as simple as that. Absolutely. And also reflecting on ourselves. Yeah, sometimes when people call us out, does it make us feel a certain type of way? Like, sure, it could. But that's on us. That's not on them for calling us out. That's on us and how that's making us feel. That's not on that person calling us out. So absolutely. Thank you for adding that. Any other folks want to chime in on what we can do, or yeah, moving forward? All right, so we're gonna look at a few resources. So I quoted them in the beginning, Daryl W. Sue. So like I said, they've got some talks or clips on YouTube, and then they've got a couple of books out and some other literature that you can read. Kevin Nadal is also someone who has written extensively about microaggressions. But I have the source here, and actually what I'm going to do is copy and paste it into the chat so that you all can pull it up. But it's from Indiana University. And so when you click on this link, it'll pull up different articles or different activities, different resources about microaggressions. And so they have them based on like race, ability, class, gender, all different sorts of things. So give me 1 second here. Let me pull this up or post it in the chat so that you all can have it. But yeah, I found like this one from Indiana University to be very user-friendly and talks about a lot of different microaggressions. And then another resource for microaggressions is, again, it goes back to the point about stepping outside of your usual space, engaging with things, people, places that you don't normally engage with, and just self-reflection. And yeah, that is a free resource, right? But it does a lot when it comes to microaggressions. So let me look at this. All right, so then all I have left for you all is just if you have questions, comments, concerns, you know, you can ask, would this be a microaggression? Would this not be a microaggression? But just, you know, anytime or any questions or comments that you all have.
Cinnamon, would you be willing to make this slide deck available to us?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that. Let's see, if you want,
At some point in time in the future, maybe, or I don't know if you guys are posting things on the websites post these meetings.
yeah.
Sorry,
So if you want these slides, you can, if you want to, Matt, go ahead and just message me privately with your email, or also I'll go to the next slide, which has my email. So then you can just also email me and I could send you the slides. But yeah, and then with that, if this topic or, you know, so my role is to talk to people about anything that's related to our mission at the YWCA, which is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. So if this topic or any other topic, you know, that's related to that, you would like a speaker to come present, I'm your person for that. So you can send me an email, and I can do that. Or if you're just like, hey, it'd be cool if you could talk about this, I will put on a training for that or another webinar for that too. So, but yeah, absolutely. Just send me your email and I can go ahead and do that. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? I appreciate y'all being on here. And for turning on your webcams. I live by myself, so it's nice to see people time to time. Awesome. So if there's, I'll be on here for another minute or so. So if there's no other questions or comments, again, my name is Cinnamon Porter. My email is listed below, cporter@ywcamclean.org. Thank you all for joining me today in this webinar on microaggressions. Definitely check out the link in the chat from Indiana University. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Hey, Cinnamon. Can I catch you for a second before I leave?
Absolutely. What's going on?
Awesome. Thank you. This was really great. I really appreciate